Okay, today we're going to talk about Federalist number 51 and just kind of give you a heads up of where we're going with this. Is I'm starting off the review sessions with the foundational documents that you're going to need to have some sort of an idea about because on an FRQ or written response, you're going to have to be able to cite from either one or multiple different documents that we're covering here. So I promise you that we're bouncing around with all these documents. It does mean something. And after this Federalist number 51, I believe all we have left is Federalist number 70, and then a letter from Birmingham Jail, and then we'll move on to individual units and get down to that information as well. Now, what you are seeing in Federalist number 51 that Madison does right is he's basically saying, okay, the general fear is that this new government is too powerful and it will infringe upon liberty. But what he's going to argue in Federalist number 51 is it's going to do exactly the opposite. The way the federal government is set up is going to cherish and promote liberty rather than take it away. So, right from the beginning, he's going to offer a couple of solutions or a couple of calm down factors, if you will, to let people know that we're not in the business of taking away liberty. Now, how are we going to do that? Well, first and foremost, we're going to practice separation of powers, okay? We're going to break the major functions of government into three different branches. And more importantly, what we want to do with these three branches of government is make sure that they have independence. We don't want one branch to control the membership of the other two. So what we're going to do for the most part is open it up to the people to determine who fills these branches, okay? Now, he'll instantaneously say then, okay, now, even though I said this, there's one kind of issue at hand, and that's the judicial branch. Now, he has no problem with the people elected in the legislative branch or the executive branch. The issue that he has is with the judicial branch is because the average everyday citizen doesn't know the qualifications that's needed to be a judge, all right? And more importantly, is in the Constitution, this new Constitution, these judges are going to serve for life, and they need to because they have to do what's right rather than what's political. So we're going to take that branch and that branch alone, and at least their membership, and divide it amongst the legislative branch, which will confirm it, and the executive branch, which are going to be the people that are going to appoint it as well. Now, also, what he's also going to talk about is how the liberty will be protected. Is more importantly is down here at this point right there. All right, so two different ways to calm everybody down that liberty will be preserved is this. There are multiple checks and balances included in the Constitution, all right? So a check and a balance is one branch's power to stop the ability of another branch to perform some sort of action or function or what have you. And they're all over the place. So if a dominant faction in the legislative branch were to infringe upon liberty, you would also have the ability of the executive branch to overturn that law. And if they don't do it, then the judicial branch to deem it unconstitutional. So there's many different checks and balances that will needed. And he also goes on to say, and this is kind of a very famous quote here, is that not only do you need checks on government, you need them on people. And he'll go on in Federalist number 51 to say, if all men were angels, no government would be needed. But we're imperfect. And we discussed that in Brutus number 1, where Brutus was very fearful that these federal offices would attract the wrong people. And the wrong people get in office, they do terrible things, and goodbye liberty. So what he's basically saying is, don't worry, okay? I understand that fear, but there's multiple checks and balances. Now, he'll also talk about this idea of safeguards, if you will, with the idea of popular sovereignty. Remember, at least the two of the three major branches are going to be composed of citizens who are elected by citizens, all right? So they will have elections to hold them accountable, but also this idea of the social contract theory, that if people are very upset with their government, they can always break away and form a government that will uphold those inalienable rights that we discussed in Federalist number 10, Declaration of Independence as well. So, all right, so to kind of break it down for people so that they would calm down, at least, understand that this government's not about infringing upon liberty, he talks about what the separation of powers is going to look like, okay? Take a look at the legislative branch, which Madison will discuss is usually deemed the most important branch in a Republican form of government. Look what we've done. we've broken the legislative branch, the most important branch, into two houses. All right, the House of Representatives and the Senate. So we split power there. But also, what we've done for those houses, at least in the beginning, is their elections or constituencies are different. Now, remember, at the very beginning, the House is elected by the people. They're directly elected by the people. The only institution in our government to ever say that's always been the case with them. But in the beginning, the Senate is elected or appointed by state legislatures. Okay, so the people are not originally voting on senators. Okay, and senators, because they're chosen by state legislatures, will have a much more different viewpoint of current topics than the other ones will. So we're dividing power there. Now we're also dividing power on this federal form of government. Now remember, we talked about this, that this is federalism, best defined. That in this government, the federal government, we're going back to our Venn diagram here, the federal government will have powers, all right? Then we're going to take some of the other powers and divide them, give them to the states as well, and then we're going to have ones that they share. So not only are we going to divide the power in the most important branch, we're also going to divide power amongst the federal government in state governments as well, all right? And even within these two entities, so the federal government will not only yes, it will have power, but they're going to divide the power in itself. We'll divide it amongst a executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. And the same could be said of the states too. When it gets to the states, each state is going to have a legislature, an executive branch, and then a judicial branch. They will. And more importantly, states will also have local government. So there's a whole lot of division going on with this as well. And when you talk about that, dividing power in two separate ways, okay, or, we call that double security. All right, and it's a vocabulary term that might show up. This idea of double security, and it can be defined as different governments will control each other, but at the same time they'll be able to control by itself. And so there it is. So just in case one method fails, then you always have a fail-safe on the back end as well as two. And then I'll also say, bring up this idea of checks and balances, and they are prevalent. All right, they're prevalent in the Constitution. They will prevent one group from dominating over the other. So, for example, if the legislative branch passes a law that a majority of the public disagrees with, the president can always veto it. If the president does not veto it, remember, you also have the fail-safe of it being ruled unconstitutional as well. Now, if the president is committing misdemeanors or major crimes, it can also be impeached as well. So there's a whole lot of things going on. Now, this is a Madison piece, so he is going to talk about factions as well. He does love factions. So what I would tell you is this with his idea on factions is this. He's ultimately going to say, okay, we got two different options we could do in order to control factions, which we know are dangerous in a confederacy or an Articles of Confederation style of government. We know they're dangerous. So we can have an authoritarian government that controls all aspects of life. Once again, we don't want to do that. So what we want to do is divide power. We want to divide power because there's so many different safety nets in case a faction takes control of one of those branches and begins to perform negative actions on a population. And I'll take you to the civil rights era of this time, and look what was happening. Southern states are cracking down on African American liberties. You have the Jim Crow South, you have segregation, you have all these different obstructions like literacy tests, poll taxes, grandfather clause that are put in place to stop African Americans from participating and, more importantly, voting. So we have a faction at a state level dominating or infringing upon infringing upon African American liberties as well. Now, what happens is, okay, that's happening. Now the federal government steps in, and each of the branches make sure that infringement upon liberty is not going to happen. For example, in the legislative branch, they passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which bans segregation in public spaces. They also passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which upholds the 15th Amendment and gets rid of all those voter discriminations. You have the Supreme Court stepping in with Brown v. Board, viewing segregated schools unconstitutional. We also have the forced busing issue in Charlotte versus Mecklenburg, where in order to desegregate societies, forced busing is an option. And then you also have the executive branch federalizing the National Guard in Arkansas and escorting African American children into a predominantly all white high school. So, once again, factions are best controlled in this environment. And more importantly, what I'll also say too is listen, there's a whole lot of division going on in this government, division at the federal level and state levels. And I hate to go back to this, but I'm going to go back to my Footloose example here because what you have there is by the way, Footloose is a great movie. You should take a look at it. You have a faction that is dominating at the local level, okay? Kids can't dance and so on. What are the chances that that faction will become so popular that they'll dominate all offices in the state legislature? They'll have a person that is in their group that's the governor. They'll have a large majority of people in the federal government, whether it's the legislative branch or the executive branch or the judicial branch. It's slim and none, all right? It's slim and none. So factions with all this division of power are going to have a terribly difficult time dominating. And what is the end product? The end product is this, all right? Liberty is cherished in this new government, okay? It's cherished. We are not in the business of taking away rights. We're in the business of supporting rights, all right? Or upholding one's rights as well. Now, I did add kind of a simplified version down here, and I will once again always attach the notes to this video. I'm also going to put questions on AP Classroom. I want you to check that as well too. And there's a couple of opportunities out there that I'm going to attach to this message too. But once again, I'm going to close with this, which is I do miss you. I really do miss you. And I miss being in class, and I miss teaching you, and I can't wait to get back. So without further ado, tomorrow will be Federalist number 70, and then we will have the letter from Birmingham Jail, and then it's on to really hardcore reviewing. So take care, have a wonderful day, and we'll see you soon.